Friends, Romans, countrymen, we are back. Today we're doing something a little different. We are going to be doing our Dynasty running back updated rankings. And to be completely frank, I'm going to talk through this list that I've created, the visual aid that you see behind you here. I'm just going to give a little bit of context to why I have these players in the order that I do. I'll first start with a disclaimer that I'm not a really big tier guy. Like, I used this as a visual aid, and it's a graphic that I figured would help all you guys follow along sort of with my thought process and breaking guys down into some categories. But to be frank, I don't really subscribe to the tiers mentality. In Dynasty, it's pretty simple for me. It's, do you want them on your team or do you not? Is it a fit for the situation that your team is in? Are you a rebuilder, retooler, contender, somewhere in the middle? All those things I think are far more important than what tier a running back is in. All that being considered, let's just dive right into it so I don't waste your guys' time. At number one, I have Bijan Robinson. No surprise there. I think still in Dynasty, he's going to be the guy for the next several years. He's a phenomenal athlete, and he is worth what you pay for him. Second, I have Jahmyr Gibbs. Also speaks for itself there. You know, the Lions' offense does not seem to have slowed down by any means with Ben Johnson leaving. They are still very efficient, very fantasy relevant, and Jahmyr Gibbs, after putting up, depending on what your format is, you know, for me, a 71-point week in most of my leagues this last week, I think it would be disrespectful to have him anywhere but two. I think one of the big two risers, you know, which are the next two guys we're going to be talking about here, is Devon Achane, you know, regardless of being on a terrible offense this season and a Miami Dolphins team that, quite frankly, looks like they need to enter a full rebuild. He has been one of the most consistent players in all of fantasy football, giving you consistent running back one numbers even when Tua throws 3 to 4 picks in a game. I think as, you know, the time goes on, we might be witnessing Devon Achane as one of the best pass-catching backs, you know, of this generation, you could say. You know, his yards after the catch are incredible. He has big playability to take it to the house at any given time. Speaking of big playability, next I have the next biggest riser on the list, Jonathan Taylor. Now, I picked him up in a lot of Dynasty startups this offseason at the 406. I just checked the other day. I think Jonathan Taylor will probably go in the second round, maybe the early third round of Dynasty startup drafts this next season, and it's warranted. You know, he's probably on pace to break the touchdown record for a running back this season. He's single-handedly winning you matchups on a weekly basis, and this Colts team that is definitely going to extend Daniel Jones here and has a ton of weapons around it, mixed with a pretty damn good offensive line, seems primed for Jonathan Taylor, who's entering age 27 next season, to carry this on and continue this level of production, I would say, until he's about 30. I know we've been wary in the past of the running back age cliff, but Derrick Henry and Saquon have, you know, staunchly disproven that if you are the right caliber of back. And I do believe Jonathan Taylor is that. Next, I do have Ashton Genty, and I'm not going to lie, I debated this one a little bit because I, at one point, had, you know, Quinshon Judkins ahead of him, even Amarian Hampton ahead of him, you know, and I think all of those things are probably valid, you know, to consider. We haven't seen the best out of Ashton Genty to start here. And I think the real caveat that you have to give with Ashton Genty is just the situation and the team that he's on, right? And yes, the Raiders are awful. And they just fired Chip Kelly this week, and the offensive play calling has been abysmal. The offensive line is terrible. He's taking the most amount of contact behind the line of scrimmage as any running back in the league. So is Ashton Genty getting a fair swing? No. But, you know, have I seen more productive games so far out of Judkins, out of Hampton in their limited appearances? Yes, I have. All that being said, I do believe in the Raiders to eventually figure this out, and I do think Ashton Genty's talent level still warrants him at being slightly above the other two. I'm not going to dwell too much on Judkins and Hampton. I've talked a little bit about them. I think they're phenomenally talented. The only reason I have Judkins above Hampton, if you were looking for my reasoning, all three of these guys could be basically interchangeable on my ranking. rankings as of now, but Judkins is 1 year younger. He's looked a little bit more elusive, and I think he's done a little bit more with less of a supporting cast in Cleveland than Hampton did on the Chargers. That's the only reason for him being above, but again, I'm not going to fight any of you guys on interchanging the three of these guys. I think we've been blessed to have a really talented rookie running back class, and all three of these guys, if you are rostering them, you are lucky and looking like you got phenomenal value in your rookie draft this year. The next guy, James Cook, deserves to be in this tier based off the performance he's given you this year, the offense that he's in a high-powered Buffalo system, the extension he just signed, and quite frankly, just what he's putting on tape here. He's showing he can get it done as a receiver. He's showing he can be elusive as a workhorse back and take big plays to the house on these deep, long runs, touchdowns over 60 yards, which he's done multiple times this season. Now, I typically was not a long-term James Cook fan going into this season. In fact, I liquidated him from several of my Dynasty teams before the season started. Ended up not being the best of calls for me, but I think he deserves to be in this tier level, and he's a guy that if you are anywhere in the middle or, think you're contending in the next 2 to 3 years, James Cook is probably a guy you feel confident in rolling out as your RB1, and I think that's, enough to put him in this tier alone. The next one I think is where I'm going to get the most amount of pushback. I do have Cam Skadaboo up here, and I considered putting him in tier 1. I'm aware that I'm probably a lot higher on Cam Skadaboo than a lot of the rest of the Dynasty community, and I do get that feedback often. I think the way I look at it is you have a very exciting up-and-coming Giants team here with Jackson Dart at the helm and Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and a really solid trenches built out where you have potentially the best defensive line in the game. Now, yes, that offensive line probably could use a tiny bit of work, but I just think Cam Skadaboo is a dog. Before he got hurt, he was running back 8. He was getting it done on the ground. He was getting it done in the air, being involved in pass catching. And I just genuinely believe, I know this is not going to translate to any sort of data model or statistical model that other creators might throw up on the back screen for you, but Cam Skadaboo is the lifeblood of that team. And as a former athlete myself, watching somebody that can turn around the culture, that can make a team believe again, that can get the fans involved, and that can drive that will and passion forward is something that is almost irreplaceable in an organization like the New York Giants that have been stuck in mediocrity for years. That reasoning alone does boost me up to be a long-term Cam Skadaboo buyer. In fact, I bought him the day after the injury in a lot of Dynasty leagues. One of the best trades I was able to pull off this season, I felt like, was sending Xavier Worthy in a third-round pick to attain Skadaboo the night of his injury. And I know, obviously, the owner watched it happen. They were very skittish about him coming back to the same level. I think Cam Skadaboo will come back and be the same guy he was before, despite the injury. That was a long aside. Now let's blow through the next couple here. I think, McCaffrey and Barkley, they need to be at least up there. They're still going to give you years of consistent production here. And, CMC alone is winning you fantasy leagues this year. So having him this low might even be a tiny bit disrespectful. But again, it is Dynasty. And I'm just asking myself, if I was in a startup tomorrow, would I be taking Skadaboo or would I be taking Christian McCaffrey? If I was on the clock, I would lean Skadaboo. That's my reasoning on a lot of drafting these guys. Now, I do think the tier break here is actually between Barkley and Irving. And I know a lot of you guys out there are going to be like, why are you so low on Bucky? I just think what Bucky was showing you even before he got injured this year wasn't exactly the shining example of top 10 running back production. In fact, if we already even look at his game log, which you can now see behind me here, he was giving you 14 points, 18 points, 13 points, and then the 25-point spike week. And of course, over the course of a season, I'm sure Bucky would have still been able to build on this, get more comfortable in the system, and potentially give you the numbers that you were expecting out of him. Me, myself, I'm looking at these numbers and saying this is upper-end RB2 with occasional RB1 spike. And honestly, that's where I view Bucky. I think he's in a room with, Rachaad White, who has shown you he can be relevant while Bucky's been injured. Sean Tucker, who's shown you he can be relevant while he's been injured. An offense that has so many weapons, and Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Emeka Egbuka rising up, Jalen McMillan, who's going to come back from the IR, even Tez Johnson, who's shown you flashes here, Cade Otton, who's been a more than successful streaming tight end this season. I just think all those things combined with Baker Mayfield also still possessing a bit of a running threat. Bucky is capped in my mind to some degree, and sure, If Bucky's able to put together a fully healthy season where he finishes in the top 6 running backs, you guys can come back and clown me, but he's yet to do that so far. For that reason and that reason alone, I have him beneath McCaffrey and Barkley. Right beneath Bucky, I do have Josh Jacobs, a guy who is, on a high-powered Packers offense that they're locked into on contract, at least for the next couple years, and that has one of the highest red zone rush rates in the league. Josh Jacobs, his touchdown upside is massive. Outside of that, his receiving game usage isn't as exciting, and even his work between the 20s does get spread around a little bit. So that is the reasoning for having Josh Jacobs where he is today. But his touchdown upside keeps him highly relevant, and I do still believe on a contending team, you're going to get 2 to 3 really good years out of Josh Jacobs still for the value you're going to pay for him today. Next, I have Travion Henderson, who, started the season really slow, but has started to emerge here as a true dynasty asset that I want to have. Now, I'm already comfortable paying a first and second round pick to bring Henderson into my lineup, and I think that that's a fair price for him. I do have him above Kyren Williams just simply based off the age and the overall ceiling. I do think Travion has more big playability. He probably has better pass catching qualities than Kyren in a vacuum, and that would be the reasoning for having him where I do. Next, to round off this tier, I do have Kyren Williams, just because the Rams are looking like Super Bowl favorites at this point. They do have a high-powered offense. Now, Blake Corum's eaten into this workload a little bit here and there, but I don't view him as a long-term threat. I just do think Kyren does have a certain level of capped upside while he's still giving you top 10 production, and that's something to be considered. I don't ever see him having a RB3 finish, and for that reason alone, I can't put him above other guys in this list that I think do have the chance to finish in that range during their career. Now, starting off tier 3 here, and again, this is loose tiers, but I do have Breece Hall, Chase Brown, and Ken Walker all back-to-back. And I'm going to be completely honest. I viewed these guys in a pretty similar range. Breece Hall's slightly above because I do think his talent level is a bit higher than Chase Brown. Now, I don't think his talent level is that much higher than Ken Walker. I do think Ken Walker is one of the most underrated running backs that we've seen in the last 5 years. I think his skill level, his deeper metrics of breaking tackles, having explosive run rate, even his pass catching ability, would all tell you that he should be a lot higher on this list. It's simply the situation that he's stuck in Seattle, splitting touches with Zach Charbonnet on an offense that can't really figure out their run game to the degree you were hoping for this season. And I think he's more of a product of his environment than it is a representation of his skill level. Any of these 3 guys, you could probably alternate in any direction, and I wouldn't fight with you too much on it. Chase Brown, I simply have above because of the situation he's in Cincinnati on a more high-powered offense with Joe Burrow and, some of the stretches of production we've been able to see from him in the past. Now, the next guy is a huge riser here, and Javonte Williams. And I think what happens this offseason with Javonte Williams is going to determine whether I vault him further into this next category or I drop him down in this tier that he's in. Right now, I have him where he is because he's giving you top 10 numbers in a high-powered Dallas offense that is getting it done in all facets of the game. He's catching passes, he's rushing in touchdowns, and Javonte Williams is having quite the career resurgence at only age 25. If he ends up signing a Kyren Williams or a James Cook-style deal, 3 years, $11 million a year with the Dallas Cowboys this season, I could see you dragging him over into the next tier. Now, if he doesn't stay with the Cowboys and he goes somewhere else and somehow enters maybe a potentially split backfield, then that's where I'm going to start dropping him down the list. But if he stays in Dallas and Dallas don't decide to take a high-up running back in this year's draft, I could see vaulting Javonte Williams up into a similar tier as Kyren Williams, and to be completely frank, I'd probably drop him right below Kyren here. Now, the next guy is also in a contract year, Travis Etienne. If he stays in Jacksonville, his upside probably remains about where it is. If he goes somewhere else, maybe he'll get a spike. Hell, if he ends up on the Chiefs or something, I think his value will go way up. But obviously, this will be largely dependent on where Travis Etienne lands this offseason. Now, he's been a solid RB2 for you all year, and I think this is a fair range to put him in, right next to Javonte Williams as a guy that has a former RB3 finish in fantasy football and does have the upside on any given season to give you RB1 upside, but probably the consistent floor that is an RB2. The next group of guys I probably would like to have in a separate tier altogether. However, I think that they still, just flowed nicely in what I was talking about here. RJ Harvey, potential to be a starting back next year in Denver if JK doesn't come back and they don't draft somebody else. Now, I've never been an RJ Harvey guy in Dynasty, and personally, I probably have him below some of these other guys, even in a vacuum if I was making the trades. But I am evaluating what I've seen on the Dynasty market, and obviously would try to make the smartest moves for both you and me if I was managing a team to play the market to the highest of my ability. Now, with that being said, 24 years old, potentially, entering a backfield next year where maybe he's the lead back at 25, but Sean Payton's always run a two-headed monster system. I don't believe in RJ Harvey as a long-term dynasty asset, and personally, if it's me, before the end of the season here, when he gets his chance to be the lead back, now that Dobbins has gone to IR, I'd be flipping him and trying to get my first back, maybe getting a little extra on top of it, or rolling him into a wide receiver that I personally just think has far more upside. That would be my suggestion on RJ Harvey. However, in a vacuum, I think this is where he lands on the tier list and what I've seen in the dynasty community. Next is a guy in Trey Benson who had 4.3 speed and obviously has a lot of open field potential, but I never view as a true workhorse running back. For that reason alone and all the uncertainty in that Arizona offense with Kyler probably vacating this season and them retooling, maybe even moving on from Jonathan Gannon, Trey Benson isn't a guy I'm wildly excited to keep on my roster. I don't like all that uncertainty. I'd probably aim to flip him sooner rather than later, but I won't lie that he does have the upside to be a starting back, and for that reason alone, he is going to be in this category on the tier list. Next are two guys in Jaylen Warren and Derrick Henry that have upside for sure and are more veteran players, but I don't ever think have the ability to finish as a top 10 running back ever again in their career. It is unfortunate that we've probably seen the end of King Henry's ultimate reign. Now, these next few tiers I'm going to blow through really quickly because I don't want to keep you guys here all day. And personally, I think that this order all is just a mess, right? I don't really have anybody consistently above the others outside of tier 4. The rest of this is all kind of just guys I put in there under a general category, which we'll get to. But just to jump to tier 4. At the top of tier 4, I do have Zach Charbonnet. And yes, I have Charbonnet ahead of Montgomery and Dowdle and Marks and Pollard and Swift and all these guys because, one, I think there's a really good chance that Ken Walker does not end up re-signing in Seattle, and Zach Charbonnet takes over on a playoff caliber team with a high-powered, efficient offense with a great coordinator in Clint Kubiak and an ascending offensive line. He has second-round draft capital behind him. He is a talented back in certain systems, and I could see Zach Charbonnet being a bona fide starter next year. Those are the reasons I have him so high. David Montgomery, 28. He's been in a solid system in Detroit, and he's one of those premium handcuffs that if anything were to happen to Gibbs, he's probably a league winner. He does deserve his flowers and to be this high. Rico Dowdle has had incredible stretches this season, putting up over 200 yards for you at times and probably single-handedly winning you matchups. Now, only being on a one-year deal in Carolina, I doubt they bring him back, already having Chuba under contract, spending a draft pick in the past on Jonathan Brooks, having Trevor Etienne in the wings. All these factors don't make me wildly confident that they're going to dip into their cap pool and spend more money on another running back. Now, I do think that overall, you are probably going to see Rico Dowdle sign somewhere this offseason. There's going to be a team that needs a running back and that is going to benefit from his services. So I have him in this tier because I think he is going to get signed somewhere. And as a deep stash in Dynasty, if you're somewhere in the middle looking to potentially retool, I think Rico Dowdle is a fantastic buy right now. I think you could get him for cheap, and you might be able to retain a starting RB2 somewhere next season. Okay. Below that, I have Woody Marks, similar range as RJ Harvey. I never view him as a top-tier workhorse back. He was primarily a pass catcher in college. He does have that skill set, and he's shown that to you at times here in Houston, whether it's the offensive line there, the lack of offensive efficiency in general, and just his college prospect profile with his inability to, I think, be a true workhorse back. I'm never going to put him in a high-up tier. I'm always going to use him as a piece in a trade to sell or flip. And so I'm not building a team around Woody Marks, and I suggest you don't either. The next few guys here, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, these are guys that I don't necessarily expect to remain in their current situation, but still have upside in the league. They're veteran guys that have shown they can be productive, and I think some teams will take swings on them, or they will play some sort of role as a handcuff or an upside running back, similar to a Ramondre Stevenson this year, that gives you starts in the future. So I don't mind having them on the roster. Tyler Algier, I actually have in a similar range as Zach Charbonnet. He's one of those guys that I think could be a starting back on any team in the league. However, he's stuck behind Robinson. And I think he's in a contract year as well. Tyler Algier could be one of those guys that potentially ends up in a great system as the starting back or the goal line back, because as we've already seen in Atlanta, he has the opportunity to punch in touchdowns at an extremely efficient rate. That Tyler Algier could potentially become a very relevant fantasy asset for you to have. So when I talk about teams being in the middle, this is the range of guys I'm going to buy right now. Guys that are cheap and have a future as a starter and have fantasy upside that I can get for pennies on the dollar. I would imagine that you could send a late second-round pick for Tyler Algier, Braylon Allen, Zach Charbonnet for the right owner, Woody Marks, Tony Pollard, J.K. Dobbins. All these guys should be able to be bought with second and third-round picks. Some sort of amalgamation of those packages should bring these guys onto your roster. And quite frankly, if you're somewhere in the middle and looking for more pieces that might help you contend next year, rather than taking a swing on some of these guys in a draft class that isn't crazy deep, I would potentially be looking that direction, right? And Braylon Allen, again, like I mentioned, is one of those guys. A guy that could potentially be the starter next year for New York. Take that with a grain of salt. It is the Jets, but, he does have upside at 21 years old. Chuba Hubbard, I still think he has a role in this league. Aaron Jones, same deal, and J.K. Dobbins has proven he can be a starter anywhere he goes. Whether it's Los Angeles, whether it's Denver, he will absolutely have upside in this league in the future, and he will be one of those one-year rentals over and over and over again that if you just had him on your team for a cheap price, he'd probably give you at least 6 to 8 games of relevancy every season long. Now, like I said, the next tier that I'm going to talk about here is handcuffs that I want to have, or guys that might have potential upside in the future but don't currently possess a lot of dynasty value. Baishal Tootin, I know he's had flashes. Not my guy. Fumbling issues in college. I don't see him as a long-term workhorse back. Therefore, I don't think Jacksonville is going to roll with him. But again, maybe they see something I don't, and he ends up getting a starting role and has upside for you in the future. Or if anything were to happen to the main back in Jacksonville, he probably provides you with at least a certain stretch of games where he's going to give you starting production. Okay? I think that goes for the next several guys. Tootin, Sampson, Vidal. Vidal's shown he can be a serviceable player behind a good team. While Hampton's been out, he's given you solid RB2 numbers. Caleb Johnson finds himself in this tier. He's done absolutely nothing this year, has been one of the biggest letdowns of that 25 draft class. But again, we haven't seen much out of him. Is there a chance that sometime in the future, Kenny Gainwell and Jalen Warren are not available for Mike Tomlin, and he takes a chance on Caleb Johnson and he has a breakout game? Absolutely. The talent profile is there. He could still be relevant. Am I investing real draft capital into him today and sending future firsts or seconds away for him? No. But if I can get him as a piece in a throw-in deal when I'm retooling, as I'm gearing up for a playoff deadline, potentially trade deadline for you guys, yes. The next group of guys are premium handcuffs. Robinson, Harris, Stevenson, all these guys will end up finding themselves in either a top-tier handcuff role or some sort of spot starter in the future and will give you fantasy production down the line. Kyle Monangai, Blake Corum, Rashad White, Tajay Spears, Ollie Gordon, Keaton Mitchell, all about the same for me. Guys that could be starters, are, good handcuffs to have, and could have upside in the future to give you limited production and potentially help you win the league next year. Now, Keaton Mitchell's the only guy on this list that I really think does have potential upside to be a true change of pace receiving back at only age 23 years old, with potentially Derrick Henry aging out a little bit. I never expect him to be the workhorse, but he's a guy that I've always had a sweet spot for and probably overvalue compared to other dynasty creators, just to give him a shout. This final tier that we're going to talk about real quick are guys that are still fantasy relevant, but I really don't want a lot of shares of or want any of them on my roster, quite frankly. Jordan Mason, a lot of people had high hopes for. You got everything you wanted to happen for Jordan Mason this season, and he did not deliver. You were saying he's stuck behind Aaron Jones. Well, Aaron Jones goes to IR. He's the quarterback, and he has so many passing options, and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson. Well, all those guys struggled. Your quarterback went down. You rolled with Carson Wentz. You had all the opportunity in the world to just feed Jordan Mason, and he didn't deliver. I've now seen the best of what I could expect out of Jordan Mason, and it wasn't good. Now I don't want anything to do with him. If you're on my roster, get out of here. Tank Bigsby, apparently not good enough in Jacksonville, apparently not good enough to beat out guys like Shipley in Philadelphia to even give you some handcuff running back snaps. I don't really believe in him anymore, and I don't want him on my roster. Isaiah Pacheco, if he stays with the Chiefs, he's nothing. If he goes and signs somewhere else, fine. I could potentially be interested again. But for where we are today, I've seen what I've seen out of that backfield in Kansas City, and I don't want anything to do with it. The rest of these guys, rinse and repeat. Tyrone Tracy, Devin Neal, DJ Giddens, Emmanuel Wilson, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Alvin Kamara, and James Conner, who are both probably done after this season. That's why I have them included here, or they're just aging out assets. These guys do not get me out of bed in the morning, and quite frankly, they're nothing but throw-in pieces in my trades. At that point, guys, I am going to wrap this video up here. I'm going to keep breaking these down for you because I know my tiers and my list is going to be a lot different than what you get out of other creators and other sources online. If you appreciate what I've done here today, comment. Let me know if you disagree with any of my takes, and if I have guys too high or you're not paying similar prices as me, drop a like on the video. If you want to become a member of the free Discord, simply hop over to my website, dynastypricecheck.com, just my username here.com. Click the Join Free Discord button. All of these rankings are going to be available on the Discord, broken down by position for you guys. We've got a Dynasty Trade Center in there, the weekly trade show that you see on this channel. We take all the trades from our Dynasty Discord. It is the best place to be. Awesome community there. We're also doing watch parties for most of the games so that we can all talk ball together and have an awesome group of guys to bounce your trade questions off of and everything going on in your leagues. So thank you guys again for the continued support. We'll be back at you with wide receivers coming very, very soon, and I appreciate for you guys sticking around and helping me grow and being a part of the Dynasty Price Check community. Thanks again, and if you're looking for the full rankings, hop on over to the Discord. I will see you guys very soon for wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends on the way.